What do you do when you write a book and a screenplay that's the greatest horror movie of all time, only to have someone come along and crap all over it with a sequel? Well, you do what William Peter Blatty did, and you write another book, and you make another movie, and this time, you direct it. This is The Exorcist III, the real sequel to The Exorcist.
So this movie was based off a real-life serial killer called the Zodiac Killer. The movie also has some strange cameos. You got a basketball player, you got a model. Strange enough, there's no F-bombs in the movie because you do have a cameo by a young Sam Jackson. So a lot of strange things going on with this movie, but they are very, very cool. The movie starts came out in 1990, around 15 years after the exorcism of Regan McNeil. And it follows the two kind of smaller characters from the original movie, the police detective, Detective Kinderman, who's now played by George C. Scott, who, again, Exorcist movies tend to get like these amazing actors.
Yeah.
But luckily this movie was worth it. So yeah, you do have him. You got Ed Flanders, who is playing Father Dyer, who was Father Damien's friend in the original movie. He was the priest who came and talked to the mother and daughter after the exorcism as they were leaving. So actually the end of the movie is Detective Kinderman and Father Dyer walking away together.
Yeah, on the way to see a movie.
It's a great way to end that movie and for part 3 to hit because they're still best friends today. I mean, we're talking 15, 17 years, whatever, after the original time where they just met. Now we're picking up 17 years and we get to see how this friendship has blossomed and where they're going with it. So that kind of made it interesting.
Yeah, I like how they explain what they're doing for that one day on the anniversary of Father Karras's death. They have from the, from Kinderman's perspective, he's like, this is the day that Dyer gets all depressed and stuff, so I need to go take him to a movie. And then the next shot is the father going, I got to take Kinderman to a movie. This is the day he gets all depressed. So it's like neither one of them want to admit that they're sad. They're just, this is why I do this.
They went out for a beer too, didn't they?
Yeah, oh yeah.
What's that?
They went out for a beer too, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. They're pretty good friends and they bicker a little bit but yeah, it's a great dynamic.
That's one thing that starts off the movie great is because they work together very well. You can tell they're friends. Mm-hmm. You know, they go to the movie theater together and he's sitting there, I'm a police business, I'm not paying. The father goes and gets some lemon heads and he's like, why lemon heads? And it's like, well, taking confession from kids all these years, it's either lemon heads or weed. So, you got a Catholic priest saying, well, it's either lemon heads or pot. So what do you want me to do? So they're a lot of joking. Drew mentioned there was one scene that you caught that was kind of funny that Father Dyer says,
oh yeah, he's in his hospital bed and they're chit-chatting and so they're trying to give him medicine, they're trying to give him food and he's just kind of like, I'm really interested in this, and he's like, well, I got to get out of here, I got to go back to work. And as someone's leaving, the father's laying in bed and says, may the Schwartz be with you. So he just quotes Spaceballs,
which had come out not too long before this movie. I mean, when did Spaceballs come out?
87?
88, yeah.
So yeah, just a few years, but yeah, I mean, the good
reference
with you.
Yeah,
I was impressed with the script very early on in this film. Mm-hmm. It pulled me in, and like these aren't actors my age; they're not my peers, but it didn't matter. Like I was pulled in by their dialogue.
What's great about this is that William Peter Blatty wrote it. He wrote the original book, he wrote the original screenplay, and he came back and he wrote this into a book. He wrote the sequel book, I think, early 80s. So it took a while for it to get made into a movie. And awesome that it did, because he was in charge of the screenplay. He directed it. And so, I mean, if you're going to have anybody do an Exorcist movie, especially a sequel, why not the guy who created it? And you can tell in the way that this movie flows, in the way it's written, in the way it's shot. It's perfect. It's the perfect follow-up to the original Exorcist.
Yeah, the director knew what the vision was, and he went there. And second, with this being his pretty much directorial debut, I think he helped a few, or maybe was an AD on a few, but I'm wondering, because the way some of the dialogue rolls off the tongue and the way they banter off each other, I'm curious if Blatty let him do some improv in there.
That's possible.
Because you can't tell me the man who wrote the Exorcist book actually wrote a line that said, "May the Schwartz be with you." That's all Flanders coming out with that.
Yeah.
So I think, especially when it comes to the banter and then talking back and forth, I think they were just kind of like, have a conversation.
Yeah.
Say something funny. Do this. As they're leaving, say something cool.
Yeah.
And so you almost get that feel of at least at the beginning. I mean, it's very structured. Don't get me wrong, but at the beginning, the way they talk to each other, the way they're playing off each other, it feels very natural.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like they're reading lines. And I know that both Scott and Flanders are really good actors. They've been around forever. George C. Scott's already won an Oscar. He didn't accept it, but he won it at this point. But yeah, it was really cool. It was the way it flowed. So I think they probably let him do a little bit just to kind of relax and make it a better movie.
Yeah. And it shows. It's just very well acted, very well written, and it's hard to find any complaints in this movie. There's really nothing that I can find that I can nitpick about.
So Drew, you're our Zodiac guy. You know the most about the Zodiac Killer. Do you see anything in this film that maybe was borrowed from the real Zodiac Killer? Because my understanding is they took the idea of the Zodiac Killer and they just changed the name to Gemini Killer.
Yeah,
maybe made it a little creepier.
Yeah, the Zodiac Killer, he was active in Northern California in the late 60s, especially around the San Francisco area. He was convicted of, I think there were 8 attempts at murder. He actually killed 5. 3 people actually lived, but they'd give descriptions of what he looked like. He always had a mask on, or he'd have these certain glasses on, and there's a lot of, no one's figured out who he was. So there is a difference between the Zodiac and the Gemini. Is they caught the Gemini Killer.
Got caught, yeah.
Right. Zodiac Killer never got caught, and there were people who would write in and say, "I'm the Zodiac Killer," and they find out that you're not the Zodiac Killer. But he used to send stuff to the newspapers, and he'd write it in this cryptic text with all these symbols, and they've had people able to decipher some of it. But he, the Gemini Killer in this movie, wanted the press to know what was going on. He would send this stuff to the newspapers. He would send this to the police department, and he would figure this out and catch me if you can. I'll put my name in this text if you can figure it out. But he loved that attention. Now, he didn't have like a certain, he didn't cut fingers off and put the symbol on a body. That wasn't him. Most of the similarities between the two is just the fact that they just never caught him. He used zodiac symbols in his writings. So that's kind of where they got that inspiration from. I think in this one, the Gemini Killer is in Richmond. I'm going to assume Richmond, Virginia is where this was taking place. But and the police also didn't put out a lot of information about it because they didn't want the nuts to come in and say, "I'm this." So they did leave some things off the record. Only certain people know about what one of the crimes was like.
They didn't try to fake something that the killer did and put that out in the press like they did in this movie?
Not that I know of. I think they did publish some. I'd have to go back and look because I think they did put out some of the information from the cryptic text when it would get deciphered, but a lot of times I didn't even get deciphered until years after they actually got it, and he would disappear for a while. But there's a lot of speculation on who that was. They just have never been able to narrow it down.
It was Bill Gates.
It could have been. Probably no, it could have been. He's in that area.
On the theology in this film, we have a setup. We have Bill, the detective, that is basically like the typical setup for an exorcist film where someone is having a faith crisis. So Bill, he is the atheist, and Father Dyer is kind of his opposite. So 2 friends, one's an atheist and one has faith. And that is the type of setup that each exorcist film pretty much has. You've got somebody who has faith playing off someone who's struggling. And so we start there, and the film is going to introduce a theme. They're going to try to explore the idea of why is there evil in the world? How can there be a God when there's such terrible things happening in the world? In fact, I think Bill even says at some point, would a good God, or would a God who is good invent something like death? So that's where he starts in the film, and you can kind of trace his journey as he goes through this experience of investigating this demon throughout the film and see as he transforms a little bit. So if we look at each character that's having the faith crisis, who's kind of a focal point of each movie, in Dominion and Exorcist the Beginning, it's Father Merrin who's having the faith crisis. In the first original Exorcist film, it's Father Karras. Then in the second film, it's I forget this lady's name, but the hypnotist, psychologist.
Why would
lady.
you remember?
There's no need to remember that name or that
we
movie.
Don't remember that movie. Yeah. So in this
Not
film,
important.
it's Kinderman, Bill Kinderman. And in the newest movie, Believer, the person in that position is Victor, one of the girl's dads, of the daughter who's possessed. So there's always a character with this viewpoint who's supposed to put the audience in the shoes of someone who's struggling with doubt. That's kind of a mainstay of the series. And
you might, I was going to say, just to kind of throw in real quick, you might look at that and say, well, that's weak. See, doing the same story over and over. There's always someone who doesn't believe. Just stop for 5 seconds. All three of us know somebody who doesn't believe.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone I know knows somebody who doesn't believe. So it's not weak or lazy to bring this character in, because they're there. They've been there forever, and they're going to be here forever. And so it makes sense to have that person show up, because that does bring in some back and forth for the movie. It helps the story out. And then if the person does gain faith at the end, it's kind of a hero's journey going through that. So
now that I think about it too, 4 of the 5 movies are all exploring the same question: how could evil exist in a world where there's a God? If you think about it, the only one that doesn't follow that theme is the heretic, which is basically the heretic of the series. So
yeah,
let's not mention that.
Still, it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, so I apologize. I jumped on your theology thing there, but it is a great story to tell, and you can tell it a million different ways. I do like that. I like bringing in the character who doesn't believe.
They do take a position, too. The film's going to drop some lines that kind of tell you their theology. They call God the Prince of Peace, which is a name that's usually attributed to Jesus. So if you put 2 and 2 together, the film's going to take the historical Catholic position that Jesus is God. And I just say that because our partner channel, Brewery Ministries, sometimes when I say something like Jesus is God, I found that some people haven't heard that anymore, and maybe haven't heard that like Jesus is believed to be God in Christianity and Catholicism. But I hear from people on the internet who do, so that's where the film is going to come from in their perspective. There is an interesting scene after one of the priests is murdered. They show some stained glass that has a picture of Eve from the Adam and Eve story, and there is kind of an Adam and Eve thread that they put in there. I wonder, why do you guys think they brought up that story and put it in this movie?
Well, we talked a little bit about it before, and I think what you said was right, especially, once we get into the history of the movie, might as well now, since we're here. When Blatty, am I saying that right?
Sure.
Wrote this, he called it Exorcist III Legion. That was the original title for the movie. Now, going with biblical terms, Nathan, you may have to help me out here, but Legion is like everything. All I remember is we are Legion, we are one.
Yeah.
So it's obviously not just one. So, it almost feels like he's writing the final boss, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You've beaten all the levels, you're at the very last, and then here comes Legion. I think that's where he was going with. And you mentioned that Legion also is basically the devil, that you felt that the movie was saying that, all right, we're going up. This is it. This is number 3 of the trilogy. This is the end game. We have to go up against Satan. So I think when you see Adam and Eve there, and then towards the end of the movie, you see the serpent.
Yeah.
I think he really was trying to say, all right, this is it. This is the devil showing up.
Yeah, so I had read that they wanted people to think of Pazuzu as another name for Satan. So I'm not sure, though, why they didn't just want to call him the devil himself, but instead they give this fictional name to Satan and put it in the movie.
In the first movie, Father Karras is sitting there. She's tied to the bed, and he keeps saying, "Who are you?" And Reagan's all, talking in that creepy voice.
Forgot about that.
She says, "I'm the devil." Now untie these restraints. Like,
straps.
yeah, he's like keeps asking over and over again. Like she makes the drawer open up. Did you do that? Yeah. Can you do it again in time? You know,
That's the creepiest part of the
right.
movie in my
Yeah.
And
the way she says in time.
In time. So
she smiles.
He's talking to her. He's talking to this, and he's trying to figure it out. And she keeps wanting to get out of these restraints. And he says, "Who are you?" And she yells, "I'm the devil. Now open up. Now untie me." So they give the demon a name before you even hear Pazuzu. They said,
well,
right,
you don't hear Pazuzu until the second film, right?
Right. No. So they said, "I am the devil" in the first movie. So it's right there.
Oh no! So they do drop the name Pazuzu in this film. So does that mean they brought part 2 back into continuity?
No.
Well, in part 2, they named the possessive demon.
Right.
So I think they're trying to do anything they can to make part 2 relevant.
Right.
Bring back James. Nope. Locust. Nope. What's that? Pazuzu? Yeah, can we use that? Sure.
Go with it. Yeah.
Well, why don't you guys explain the mystery that we have in this film? Because I thought this is the one in the series that has a different vibe because they bring in a crime and detective story to this film and combine it with theology and demons, which is really unique.
It is. It's a really neat mystery. It's almost like a suspense.
I mean, it's a horror movie mystery.
Yeah.
Or movie mystery. Sorry. Murder mystery.
Murder mystery.
A horror murder. Say that once fast. I apparently can't. But yeah, it is a murder mystery in a horror movie.
Yeah.
Which is, again, a way to tell a story. And then you throw in the faith crisis. There's a lot to be said in there. And I really want to read Blatty's book now.
I'd like to read it too.
Because, I mean, I knew he wrote this. I did not know he directed until I started doing some research on this. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
All right, this guy has some ideas. So I kind of I need to read some of his books.
Yeah. You want to run down through give us a quick plot summary of what's happening in this one?
Yeah. So anyway, this happens, like I said, 15 years or give or take after the original Exorcism. And if you remember in the original movie, Father Karras, Damien Karras, was shaking the demon and say, take me, take me. The demon jumped into him and then he dove out the window to kill himself. And you see at the end of the movie, Father Dyer is actually the one who finds Father Damien at the bottom of the stairs. That's him giving him his last rites and everything like that. So you assume that Father Damien is dead. The movie starts off with Kinderman finding a dead body on the street. And he comes walking, or, they doing all the investigating and everything. He's looking at the palms of the person's hands. And you can tell he's very disturbed. It's because the person was killed in a way that a serial killer, the Gemini Killer, this is the way he killed people. But they never released the details. They actually lied and said that he did other things to the body after they killed him so they could tell copycats. This was perfectly the way the Gemini Killer killed people.
They took the middle finger. What they said was he takes the middle finger and he puts a zodiac on their back. And what he actually did is he took the finger off this hand and put it in the palm. That's what he actually did. And the Gemini Killer happened to be executed in the electric chair the same day, almost the same moment that Father Karras died on the steps. So the Gemini's been dead for 15 years. And now all of a sudden, all these little murders are being done in his style. So yeah, that gets the detective thinking like maybe Gemini Killer is not dead.
Again, that's a great moment in the movie because if you really think about it, this was his white whale. This was his, he would have been a part of it.
Yeah.
They caught this guy, they killed this guy, they won. And that the hell they had to go through to probably catch this guy back in the early 70s, maybe into the 60s. Who knows how long this went on. And then all of a sudden, 15 years later, it's out of your mind. You're not even thinking about it. You've worked hard to get it out of your way. You moved on and everything like that. And then boom, it's right back. And it's like the worst moment of your life is now back and you have to deal with it again. So that brings a lot of tension to the movie as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because he's telling everybody we need to open up this file again, and I need you to check this. And everyone's thinking like, well, you knock it off. This is done, and it's over with. And And that's where he eventually loses his cool and starts saying, no one knew this, and this is what's happened. And the Gemini used to decapitate his victims, and every body that they have found so far has been decapitated, and the head's been replaced with, one replaced the head with the statue with Jesus's head, and just real horrific things. So yeah, this is something that hits pretty close to home with him, and he wants to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But
yeah, no, I want to mention. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, as we find out, as the movie goes on, exactly how all this is happening, which I thought this was kind of an interesting take on how they explained how you're bringing in this serial killer and you're also bringing in a demon, and how do you mix these two together? And I thought it was a really clever way of linking all of this to the original film. And then I can let Doug go ahead and finish it up with, what happens to Father Karras's body, actually.
Like Drew said, it's an interesting way how they do it, because Father Karras is possessed when he's about to die, when he goes falling down those stairs. At the same time, a serial killer, a human, is being put to death. As he dies, Pazuzu, who is now mad that he has been exorcised from a girl, and this is the soul, Father Karras is the soul who did this, so I'm going to punish him. I'm going to take the soul of the serial killer and put it in the body of a Catholic priest. So now he has to witness these murders. He's got to live these murders. He's seeing what this guy does.
Okay, so another body is found, and it's a priest. And this priest was actually killed in a confession box. He was listening to a confession. And in the movie, you're hearing this little old lady talking about how I step on straws that are in the cross, and it makes me feel bad, and I have to confess this. And then she says, and it's like that waitress in California when I slit her throat. And this priest's like, what? And she's like, oh, and the blood, and I'm trying to deal with the blood, and her voice is starting to get a little bit more, she starts cackling. And so they go to investigate this priest's death, and it's in his confession box. And they're saying, well, the last person that he talked to was this little old lady. So he goes to that hospital to talk to her. Who did you see? And of course, she's like catatonic. She's asking, like, are you the
great creepy scene?
Are you the radio guy? Are you here to fix the radio? And he's playing with, he plays along. Yes, I am. I'm here to fix the radio. And it doesn't work.
What's wrong with it?
It plays dead people. And he's like, what? And then he's like, she goes like, I'm holding it in my hands. Do you see it? Yes, I see the radio. And then she goes, I knew you weren't a radio repairman. I'm holding a telephone. It's just, there's nothing there. But so he's like, I'm not getting any information out of her. So he's kind of walking around. He's looking in the rooms, and there's patient X is sitting in a room, but he can't really see who patient X is because it's really dark. And so that's kind of why he's there. And then his friend ends up getting taken to the hospital, Father Dyer. And then Father Dyer is killed in the same manner. And that's where he starts thinking, like, this is ridiculous. This is 100% Gemini Killer. And I think the head of the hospital ends up saying something like, so, okay, patient X, I got to tell you about patient X. We found him 15 years ago wandering around the canal, and he had total amnesia. And we put him in this cell, and he's been a catatonic for 15 years. But then, a couple weeks ago, he started to come out of it, and he started getting better, and he started talking, and he started moving. And he says he's the Gemini Killer. So, now he's like, well, I got to talk to this guy. So he goes into the cell and talks to him, and it's Father Karras's body. He's like, you look like my friend Damien Karras. And he's going, I don't know who that is. I'm the Gemini Killer. And he gets mad when he keeps saying Gemini Killer's dead. You're not the Gemini Killer. And it goes from Father Karras's body to what the Gemini Killer actually looked like. For the audience perspective, this is now who we're talking to. It's not Father Karras. It's definitely somebody else is in this body. And what you find out is that he ends up explaining that the master sucked me from this, and he put me into this body as a way to get revenge, because you performed an exorcism on a little girl, and he wasn't happy about that. So he thought, what better way to get revenge than to put put me into this priest's body and have me continue to do these, murders. But the next question is, how is he doing these murders if he's locked up and he's chained and he can't get out of the room? because people around this hospital are dying. How is this happening? And that's the other really interesting little twist in this film is at night he leaves his body and he jumps into an elderly lady or whatever, and they commit the murder, and then it comes back to him again. So it's like, I'm doing all this killing and I don't even have to leave this room. It's like, geez.
Very smart way to do it too, because, you know, catatonic people who have lived their life and their brain is gone, it would be very easy to take over. I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know the science of possession, if there is a science to it, but I would assume that somebody whose mind is just completely gone would be a lot easier to take over than, you know, somebody who's not.
So there's this one really, I mean, the creepiest scene is that hallway scene in the hospital. They got this camera set up at the end of this hallway, and it's looking down towards a nurse's station, and there's a few doors on the side, and there's cops in the back, and this nurse hears a sound, and there's no music playing, so you're just, all you're hearing is footsteps. And I think at one point you can actually hear some like off screen, you hear footsteps like running away, and you don't see anything, so you're like, what was that? She gets up, she goes down to a room, she checks in, and there's like a doctor in there sleeping, you know, and he's yelling at her, I'm trying to sleep, get out of here. And she shuts the door, walks back to the nurse's station. There's two cops sitting down there, and they're like, you need anything? And she said no. And then they get up and walk through a door. She gets up, walks over to another door, checks it, nothing, turns around, walks down the hallway off screen. And as she's doing that, this like figure in white comes streaking up behind her with these hedge clippers and follows her. And it's just like, Joe, because I mean, when you haven't seen it before,
big horn blast,
you are not expecting it. And the build up to that jump is just awesome. Doug just looked up the runtime of that scene, and that scene is, you said, about a minute.
It's a minute after the doctor yells at her.
Okay, so there's probably about another minute before that.
30 seconds to a minute before that.
Okay, so maybe about a 2-minute scene of this camera just sitting in this hallway. So you know something's going to happen, and you're just sitting here waiting, and you're waiting, and you don't know when it's going to happen. And then when that figure comes out with those clippers, that's not what you're expecting. And the first time you see it, I mean, you jump. I watched it last night, and I've seen this movie several times, and even then I'm still just like mesmerized by this. Knowing what's going to happen, I still can't look away from it because it's still that creepy. And this movie does such a great job of setting that up.
There's two other great scary scenes in this movie too. One of them, after a kill, they very quickly flash the Joker, and he's dressed as a priest. He's got a Bible in one hand and a knife in the other. And I assume sometimes they'll talk about Joker in Batman comics as the devil. So I kind of wonder if that's why they put that in there. But the other one,
it's a very quick flash too. For those who haven't seen it, it's not like the Joker shows up. And they're in a church, and again, it's one of these scenes that Drew just explained. They're in a church, and he's talking to a priest, and then the power goes out, and then there's no music, no sound, and Kinderman gets up, and he's kind of looking around. It's like, this seems weird, and then it just starts kind of showing different areas of the church. There's the tapestry, there's a statue of Mother Mary, and then it's literally a second scene, and it cuts to a couple statues, but one of the statues is sitting there with a knife painted up like the Joker. And it's a very subliminal thing. You don't notice it, but you do. And again, just like the first movie, he tried throwing in some subliminal things like that, but it was a little bit more in your face than just a flash of a different scene, like with the scary face. I mean, this is straight up, it's there. You're looking at this scene, and it's like statues, and what was that? But it goes away so quick. You don't notice it, but at the same point you do, and you're kind of freaked out.
Yeah.
And I want to mention too, Kinderman has a dream sometime right around the time that Father Dyer.
Well, it was right when he dreamed it, when Father Dyer was dying or being killed.
Yeah, and that dream was so interesting. But I guess it turns out it's not really a dream, right? Because he meets Father Dyer in that dream, and Father Dyer says this isn't a dream, implying that he's been killed.
Yeah, he's in like this waiting room at this hospital, but everybody who he knows, I guess, over the years who's been murdered is there. He's looking, and he sees the first murdered victim, and Kevin is his name, because that's the other thing is everybody who dies in this film has a K in their name. That was kind of the Gemini Killer's thing. And he
Except
looks
for
at Kevin. He's
Father
like,
Dyer.
"Oh, hey, Kevin, I'm so sorry you were murdered." "Oh, that's okay, Mr. Kinderman." It's like,
Well, some of these
It
people
is a
have their
very
heads
weird
stitched
what
back
scene.
is
on.
this? Yeah, his
Like,
head's there,
yeah.
and
And
he's
there's
just like,
angels everywhere. And this is
yeah.
where is this the scene that has Patrick
Yeah.
This
Ewing,
is all the
Samuel L.
cameos are in
Jackson,
this.
Yeah, you got
Fabio?
Patrick
Is
Ewing.
Fabio one of the angels?
Fabio shows up. Yeah.
Fabio, yeah, Patrick Ewing, and
It's
then Sam Jackson.
Was he in that? Was
That's,
he?
I believe that's where he was at.
I think so too.
Yeah, Larry King is in this scene.
Okay, yeah, he was in
Um,
the dream. He was Dream Blind Man.
yeah,
Oh yeah, I
John
forgot. Larry King.
Thompson, who was a basketball player at Georgetown. Patrick Ewing played college ball at Georgetown, where this takes
Jeff Henry,
place.
whoever that is. I'm
Um,
just looking at the IMDb.
it says ex Surgeon General C. Everett Koop. So, yeah, there's just, and it's just this weird, surreal scene where it's kind of peaceful, but like that little boy, "Oh, I miss you. Oh, I miss you too. I'm so sorry you were murdered. It's okay." It's like, what is this?
It's
But
like
yeah,
it's
that's
supposed to be
Weird scene.
like the gates
yeah,
of heaven or something, because there's an information kiosk at the beginning, and there's
yeah,
two angels standing there.
yeah,
It's like where you go when you die. And like you could go up and get a map of the theme park of heaven or something and go
Right.
to your place, and it's so
yeah.
funny.
But that comment
It's
you made
really
about the
surreal.
not dreaming is, when he gets up to Dyer's and he looks at him, he goes like, "What are you?" He's almost like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "Now I can't tell if we're both dreaming." And that's when Dyer says like, "I assure you, I'm not dreaming." And that's like, you're like, "Oh crap, what just happened?" And then he finds out that Dyer has been decapitated and had a finger cut off, and he's got all the markings of and all his blood's been drained from his body, and it's all sitting in cups next to his bed. It's like, what?
Yeah, it was a epic kill.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Definitely put some time into it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was and again, this was all in the mind of Peter Blatty, William Peter Blatty. So there's some strange ideas that actually fit, and just if you look at the first Exorcist movie, I mean, it's a straight line of just girl possession, exorcism. This movie is all over the place. I mean, you've got the possession, you've got a murder mystery, you got weird dream sequences, you've got old women climbing on ceilings. It's just all this strange stuff happening. It has the feeling of an Exorcist movie, but there's so much more happening.
yeah,
So again, it's just a really good sequel.
yeah,
Well, the demon's goal in this film, by possessing a priest, he says it was to become a stumbling block and make people think that like God doesn't exist, because they see this symbol of someone who's supposed to be a servant of God killing other people. That's supposed to mess with them. And that's very interesting, because at the beginning of the film, we found out the setup was Bill Kinderman is wrestling with, well, how could God exist with a world that's so bad? Well, the demon is using that exact strategy to turn people away from God, and then he meets Bill Kinderman. So it's like Bill is forced to face this issue of doubt through facing this serial killer. And I noticed in the cell, he keeps repeating Savior servant, and I looked that up. I was like, oh, that's got to be a Bible verse. It's Psalm 86, and a few lines later it says, "There is none like you among the gods." So it's talking about God being none like the gods. I've mentioned that term before. In the Old Testament, the term gods with a lowercase g, it referred to any spiritual being. So angels, demons, all of that. So I don't know why he's quoting that, but it's interesting, because it is a verse about spiritual warfare, and that is what this movie is about. It is about a battle between good spiritual beings and evil spiritual beings. So you've got God and the angels versus demons, and Bill is going to see demons, and then suddenly, because he sees these demons, he's going to realize, well, okay, there's this war going on. Now I've seen the villains, therefore God must exist. Because if there's a war going on and you meet one of the sides, if you meet the villain, then the hero must exist by default too. It was an interesting...
yeah. That whole kind of, that ending is really interesting. He gets a hint that he needs to get to his house, and the whole time, every time the Gemini was talking to him, he's always leaving these little hints about what he's going to do. He asked, how are you getting out of the cell? Who's letting you out of here? And he says, friends, old friends. Old friends. Right. Okay. So he's using the elderly people.
That's very much like Zodiac, leave clues.
Just leaving these little hints. Yeah. And he puts it together that his daughter's in danger when he says something like, you just bought an invitation to the dance. And then he started thinking like, oh, my daughter is going to a dance. And her name, Julie. And that's the name of this nurse that I'm looking at. It's like, he's like, I got to get home, And it turns out that he possessed an old lady and went to his house. And when the lady got there, she kind of went all catatonic again because she's asking him when it's time to go to bed. And she waited until Kinderman got to the house, and she gets she gets possessed again. And she looks at him and says like, I wanted you to see this. And she takes out the clippers and goes after his daughter. Right. And this big fight ensues. And this is where I think is one of the coolest moments. He's got Kinderman up and he's choking and he's like, he's about to kill him. And all of a sudden his eyes just get huge and he yells, morning, morning. And at that moment is when Father Morning is walking down this hallway, getting ready to go into that cell and perform an exorcism.
You mean the guy I thought was Eminem?
Yeah, the guy you thought was Eminem. And that's when Doug has mentioned this on, like, when we talked about the last podcast, how the demon is terrified when the priest shows up. And they show, the eyes inside of this thing. And he is oh, no, here comes this priest.
Here comes God.
So he had to leave that body and go back into Karras's body to fight this priest who's good. And then this is where we get the big showdown. But it's just so cool when he's just like morning, what? And then it just shows how terrified this demon is.
And we should mention that scene was a studio mandate because Blatty did not have an exorcism in his book or the script, and the studio forced that. And you can kind of tell because this character is not developed. Like you see him earlier,
not at all,
out the window, and it's like, who's this guy? And then here he is at the end. I did kind of like it though, although you can tell he was thrown in last minute. But when he shows up, like the music and the shot, you know that it's going to go down.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, that's when good and evil, heaven and hell meet.
Yeah.
This final showdown. And Drew mentioned, that's what I mentioned when we were doing the the
beginning or believer.
Yeah. They didn't have that moment. They didn't have that God has arrived moment.
Right.
And I'm not saying that it has to be a Catholic priest even. I mean, it kind of does because the Exorcist movie is based off of Catholicism mostly, but that was the issue I was having. If you watch part 3 and you watch the original, when Father Marin shows up, when Morning shows up, the demon is scared.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, I've been dealing with this priest, in the first one, I've been dealing with this priest who's struggling with faith. In part 3, I've been dealing with this cop who doesn't believe. But now the believer shows up, the person who's not struggling, the person who knows shows up. And you notice that a lot of Catholic priests die in these movies.
They do, but the demon's still afraid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He knows absolutely. That there's power from God channeling through these people. And this is the scene, I believe, when we see the serpent crawling on the floor, right? And so that's that second callback to the Adam and Eve story, which I think that's a hint that, Pazuzu is Satan there.
Yeah.
And it's a great scene. I mean, obviously I spoiled it a little bit. The Father Morning does die. But after Kinderman went home, saved his family from the old lady, he went back, and that's when he found Father Morning dead. The demon had won.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, what do we do now? We've got a non-believer going up against a demon. This isn't going to happen. That's when the moment of faith happens. I love this scene. I don't know what anyone else, I mentioned it off camera that George C. Scott was nominated for a Razzie for this movie.
That's insane.
I don't know what they were looking at. I mean, this was an amazing performance by this guy. And, that's just, you got to wonder, and, back in the 90s, maybe they were just like, oh, well, this is a movie about God. So again, I'm not saying that true or false, but it kind of has that feel to it because everyone says this is an amazing movie. Everyone says this should be the true sequel. Yet they're going to say that this was one of the 5 worst performances of 1990. I mean, that was right around Biodome time. So come on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
That
there's like
can't
one
be.
line where he like goes over the top a couple times, or he's like, "I believe in pain." I mean, I
Like
could see how
that.
that could go either way, but overall,
Yeah.
man, he was awesome.
It was
Yeah, I mean,
great.
the way he's talking, you got to realize he's 10 feet in the air being held up by some kind of demonic power. He's just, he's obviously in pain. So,
Mhm.
yeah, when he's like, I believe, and I got it right here, I believe in death, I believe in disease, I believe in injustice and humanity, torture, anger, and hate. I believe in murder, I believe in pain, I believe in cruelty and infidelity, I believe in slime and stink and every crawling, putrid thing, every possible ugliness and corruption. I won't finish it
You
because
son
he
of a.
swears. You son of a gun.
So that whole part was part of the original screenplay. The whole him doing that, him doing the execution style shooting of basically Karras's body, because Karras even says like, "Now shoot me now. He's gone. Shoot me now. Kill
And he
me."
takes over for just a second.
He takes over and he says, "Do it now," and that's when he did it.
So
And
it's almost with Kinderman finally coming out and saying, I believe, he says, I believe in you.
mm-hmm.
And now believing in evil, you've got to believe in faith. You've got to believe in good. You got to believe in God.
Yeah.
I took it
And
as that's what he was saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's when God steps in.
Yeah.
And he's like, we just need a second. And pulls out the Gemini Killer just for a second. That's when Father Damien, patient X, just says, now, shoot me now. And Kinderman just pow pow. And he's gone.
Yeah. So in the book, in the original ending to this movie, it's a little bit different than the way it was filmed. And obviously, so we had to go back and add an exorcism, which Blatty said he didn't really want to do, but the studio kind of forced his hand. They're like, you just made a movie called The Exorcist III. We should probably have an exorcism in it, right? So he did it. But the original ending of this novel has the Gemini Killer calling Kinderman to his cell so he can give that long speech at the end, right? And then he willingly dies. The Gemini Killer leaves on his own because he says his whole purpose of being a serial killer and doing all this evil stuff was to get back at his father, who was an evangelical Christian. So he ends up, and his dad dies of a heart attack during that scene. So he's like, oh, well, my whole point of being on Earth was to make a mockery of my father. He's not here anymore. I have no reason to be here. And he leaves.
That doesn't make a very good on-screen climax.
No. Right. So they're like, okay, so we're going to, so in the original screenplay, it's similar to that, except it's not self-induced. It's actually forced with, supernatural ability. So, but his murders are both given about the same. This is what I'm trying to do. It's like my father, I didn't get along with him and he made me feel bad. So I'm going to do all this bad stuff. But yes, the ending I can see. They said they did a screening and Lady said they brought in a bunch of zombies to come in and watch this movie so they could purposely not like it. So they could come in and say, yeah, we didn't like that. You need to put an exorcist in it. So he rewrote it. But honestly, I think the ending is better than that. I love that power battle and him coming to terms with, if there's such an evil as this, and there's got to be something, good, and there's got to be something just as good. So,
and the other priest does have a horrific death too.
Yeah,
he gets stuck to the ceiling, and then they basically pull his head off the ceiling, and it's man. But he falls to the ground, and he is the one who says something to Father Karras, to take control, so that the demon is vulnerable for Bill to shoot. So yeah, it all comes together, and there is a creepy part where the floor opens up and you see the first boy who was murdered crucified on oars. Like it is creepy. And in one of these scenes, Gemini is called Pazuzu's son. So just think about that. Son of Satan. It's an Antichrist figure. So there you see the exact opposite of God and Jesus. And the spiritual battle in this film is just very clear. It's really interesting. It's like all of a sudden, are we in like a C.S. Lewis book or something? That's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it was really well done. Like I said, I'm glad we did these because I hadn't seen this one in a while. So I watched it again last night and seen it a few times. The first time I ever saw it was at Doug's, He's like, you ever seen this one? I'm like, no. He's like, oh, you got to watch this. And I was like, wow, this is just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it was the right sequel to do.
Yeah, you couldn't do it any better than that.
I do want to mention too that the weapon, the scissors, the huge scissors that it was a medical scissors,
massive scissors
that are supposed to be spring loaded so that they're very easy to open, but then they can cut with huge force, decapitate people.
It's that bad.
I love that weapon. I think that's very unique and scary. Although they say that in real life that wouldn't work. Like, it would take equal force to open something spring-loaded like that as it would to close it. But I think they probably did that because they had an old lady using it. And if it was very hard to open up those scissors, it's like, how would this old lady do that?
Right.
Other than they say when people are demon possessed, they have inhuman strength. So maybe they could have gotten away with it. But very cool, unique weapon.
Reagan was able to throw a grown man out of the window in the original one. That's what happened to the director of Chris McNeil's movie.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some strength there.
And I think they actually kind of mentioned a little bit of that in part. I'm sorry, Doug, I didn't mean to.
Oh, no.
They mentioned part of that in this one too, where talking about like some of these victims in this hospital. I'm like, who's going to do this? And they even said, like, these are old people. They can't do that. Like, who killed his friend? No one old's going to do that, so it's like, that's why they had no suspects. But in actuality, it was because they were being possessed and had that strength.
Oh yeah. When they find out that each murder was committed by a different person. Yeah. That's like the midpoint of the film. That confuses Bill. And I like that because it's like, oh, now what are they going to do? This doesn't make any sense, because they thought it was the Gemini Killer. And if each person is committing, like a different person is committing each of these murders, I thought that made for a cool deepening of the mystery.
Yeah. Oh, it was really well done.
There's an Easter egg too on IMDb. It says, in the scene where Nurse X hits a police officer and he's like flies back against the wall, you can see a cable hooked to him. So if you watch the movie again, look for that and see if you can see the cable.
1990 special effects were still struggling.
Just like Batman 89.
I do find it funny though. I mentioned this when we were doing Believer, how this movie is it ends similar to Believer, where it's like, so let me explain myself. I'm not making any sense. In the original movie, when Father Damien goes jumping out of the window, Kinderman is approaching the house. So he witnesses Father going out. He's witnessed these stories and everything like that. So we've got a cop who's witnessing everything happen, a cop who's not a part of what's happening. Come to part 3 and in Believer, the scene at the end, I mean, somebody walks in and they see a dead priest with half his face ripped off and a dead patient who has been shot by a cop standing there with a gun. What just happened?
How are they going to
How is he going to explain this?
Right.
You can't put in a report, the devil possessed an old priest that we thought was dead and then put the serial killer's soul into his body, so I had to shoot him. And that serial killer in the priest's body killed the priest too. What? What? And then same thing with Believer, I mean, you're sitting there and you got a priest on the floor with his head torn around. You got a dead 12-year-old girl who's cut up and, all this stuff. You got another 12-year-old girl who's all cut up and crying and freaking out. What happens when a cop shows up then?
Yeah.
How
do you explain
it?
So
I always find that funny in movies when they there's no way to explain this.
Yeah, Bill probably would have been going to jail.
Yeah.
In real life.
Yeah. At least at the end of the first one, he sees a priest jumping out of a window and he can just kind of say, well, suicide. He just jumped out of the window because he hadn't seen Reagan.
He was getting to know Father Damien.
Yeah.
And he was getting to know Dyer as well. So in the movie, so, he kind of realized that, well, at least they think this is happening.
But your point with like the end of this one and the end of Believer, it's like you're going to spend a lot of time down at the police station.
Yeah, or even
talking about this
part 2. I mean, how are you going to explain the nanny getting killed by demonic fire or something? It's just like, what happened? Oh, fire.
And then the floor fell apart up there. And yeah.
I will point out one thing though that always gets me whenever, and it's always at the beginning when Kinderman, you mentioned the scene where Kinderman's like, well, I got to go cheer up Father Dyer. And Father Dyer's like, I got to go cheer up Kinderman. In the original movie, Kinderman and Father Damien talk like twice.
Yeah.
So 15 years later, he's not thinking about Father Damien and his death, other than the fact that Father Damien's best friend, Father Dyer, needs help.
Right.
So the fact they had that scene where Father Dyer's like, I got to go cheer up Kinderman doesn't make too much sense because Damien was not Kinderman's friend.
Right.
I like it, but it's a retcon.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless that's just Dyer's way of coping with his actual depression, just
that was
put
the
it
only
on to
thing I could
someone
come up
else.
with. Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, those two weren't like best friends in the first
No.
movie. So, but even with that maybe little flaw though, there's really nothing wrong with this movie.
Yeah, I'm in total suspense when I ask, do you recommend The Exorcist III?
No, only if you've watched 2 7 times. You got to watch part 2 7 times, and then part 3 will be
On repeat.
the best movie ever. Because you just watched The Exorcist 2 7 times.
Yeah.
No, it's a great movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
100% recommend. It's my second favorite horror movie of all time. Yeah, and the first one, of course. Yeah, it's a very smart horror movie with just so many different elements, but it's an Exorcist movie.
Yeah.
You know you're watching an Exorcist movie, but the fact that they just threw in that murder mystery just made it that much cooler, that much deeper, a better, just a cool story. It's not like, how are we going to save this possessed kid? It's what's going on.
Yeah.
It's almost like Batman showing up in a superhero movie, because Batman's not a superhero. He's got to do the investigating and everything like that. So if you consider the like the Catholic priests, the superheroes, here comes Batman now, and he's got to do the investigating to save the day. So basically Exorcist III is a Batman movie.
I follow your logic. I see what you're saying, but I agree.
It's just something different to a cool series that has just focused on only exorcism. To throw something else different in there would be cool.
And they could have completely just did a rehash. It's, hey, this worked the first time, let's just do it again. And it just wouldn't have been the same, because you can't just do The Exorcist again.
Especially with Blatty writing and directing. He's not going to want to do the same movie over again.
So for him, to come up and go, what can I do differently, but yet still make it, like you said, you're watching an Exorcist movie when you're watching this. The way it was filmed, everything about it, the way it was shot, the way the dialogue flows, the quick cuts, the lack of music, and just getting that natural, you're in a dark sanctuary at night. This is what it sounds like. Or you're in a hallway of a hospital in the middle of the night. This is what it sounds like. I loved it. It was so good. So yeah, absolutely watch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved it both times. First time I saw it was like 15 years ago. I was home alone. I got myself a pizza and I watched this movie and I was blown away. Now, at that time, I did not like the first movie. Doug told me it was the greatest scary movie of all time. I didn't like it. And I watched it again for this, review. And I was really like, both movies were like hypnotic, but this one in a different way than The Exorcist 1, because that one, you sense the darkness. It makes you feel like the evil that we, who have faith, the evil that we're up against, right? It makes you feel what it's like to not be with God, or maybe what Satan would be like. And you can't sit in that all the time. You can't watch that all the time. But this movie, it has the detective element, and it's not quite as horrifying in that sense, and in the darkness sense. It's still a great horror movie and has some good scares, but the mystery element, I think, neutralizes it to where you could watch this one like regularly, whereas if you were watching the first Exorcist regularly, I might question if you're okay. But this one, this has to be one of my favorite horror movies. I mean, it is just great. But I looked on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, just curious what the score was. It's 59% from the critics and 57% from the audience. And I just got to say, I don't get it, man.
They've asked the wrong
It's
people.
much better.
I just think, well, it is a period film, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I could see that.
It doesn't stand up the way other movies do nowadays.
With
it
modern
feels
effects.
like, yeah, it feels like a 90s movie.
Yeah.
Because at the end, there are some special effects they throw in there. There's just some lightning and stuff like that. And it doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
I would take it over bad CGI, though.
Oh, 100%.
Personally.
Yeah. Apparently
100%.
there was supposed to be a scene where the Gemini Killer's face morphs into a bunch of different faces, and they shot it that way, but Blatty said the effects were so bad he was embarrassed, and we're not putting that in the movie. So instead, we're just going to flip it over and show the actor who plays the Gemini Killer.
So they saved those effects for Dominion, right?
They put it in Dominion. But yeah, he said like they shot it, and he's like, nah, it just doesn't look good, and I'm not doing this. So this is what you get.
It's very good. You should check it out.
I did forget one small cameo, just because we were mentioning cameos for the Walking Dead fans out there.
Oh, yeah.
One of the doctors was Uncle Herschel.
It was. Herschel Green was in this movie.
Wow.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yes, I forgot he was in this too, and I had to, when I was watching it last night, it took me a second because he's a lot younger and a little thinner, and he had hair, and so it's like, oh, hey, it's Herschel.
Wow. Well, guys, we have a whole Exorcist retrospective playlist on YouTube now. So if you want to hear us cover the other movies, check those out. There are also some links to some Exorcist merchandise in the video description, such as the collector's edition of The Exorcist III and a book, 50 Years of The Exorcist. That's highly rated. So check those out. And we will be back soon. I believe we're covering Dominion and Exorcist the Beginning soon. So
Do we have to?
prepare yourselves for, is it so bad it's good, or is it just bad? We'll find out.
Well, I'm going to have a video up here soon too, because this was a cool session. And from a couple things that both of you said, I think I can figure out the next two movies of The Exorcist.
Predictions.
You know where they're going to take
Legacy.
the story?
I have an idea.
Okay,
I
awesome.
have an idea. It was from what you said, so I kind of want to. I'm going to make a video about that.
I'm interested about this.
Okay. Yeah.
And here's one thing I will say: Doug is usually pretty close on these when he comes up with stuff. We'll go see an M. Night movie, and he'll tell me the whole plot before we even watch it as his guess, and he's always right every time.
I got lucky with the not the happening. What was the one when they're in the woods and the monsters?
Oh, The Village.
Big monsters. The Village. Yeah.
Yeah, you told me The Village basically like you just read the screenplay right before we sat down to watch it.
Yeah,
He was right on. So interesting.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that.
We'll be on the lookout for that on our channel, and we will see you guys next time.
All right, The Exorcist III came out.
That's not a lie.